Massaging the alien queen's legs led to an unexpected forbidden moment. First contact, the descent through Nyxara's atmosphere was like falling through layers of shimmering silk. Alien Mercer watched through the transport's viewport as crystalline structures emerged from the mist, towering spires that caught the light of 3 distant suns and fractured it into patterns that seemed to communicate with one another. "Remember, Ambassador Mercer," said Commander Reeves beside him, her voice tight with concern. "The Nyxarans have refused diplomatic relations with 17 other species. We're the first they've invited in over 60 years. Elian nodded, adjusting the collar of his diplomatic uniform. "I've studied the briefings. They're photosynthetic crystalloids. They communicate through light patterns and tactile transfer. Limited verbal capabilities. And highly hierarchical," Reeves added. "Their sovereign Valera is considered sacred. No direct eye contact, no touching, and absolutely no interrupting her light sequences." The transport settled onto a landing platform that hummed with faint vibrations. Elian felt his heart quicken. At 32, he was the youngest diplomat ever assigned to such a crucial mission. The Galactic Alliance needed Nyxaran crystal technology to stabilize the wormhole network, and the Nyxarans needed human agricultural expertise to survive their planet's changing light cycles. What the briefings hadn't prepared him for was the sheer beauty of the welcoming delegation. As the transport doors slid open, Elian stepped into a cathedral of light. 12 Nyxarans stood in formation, their translucent bodies pulsing with internal light that rippled in synchronized patterns. Their forms were humanoid but more slender, skin like polished opal with delicate facets that caught and transformed light. At their center stood Valera. Unlike her companions, whose light patterns shifted in blues and greens, the Sovereign's inner luminescence burned with amber and violet. Her face was more defined than the others, with features that somehow managed to be both alien and arresting. High cheekbones, lips that seemed carved from rose quartz, and eyes like twilight, pupils expanding and contracting with the light she generated from within. "Sovereign Valera," Elian said, bowing deeply as instructed, "I bring greetings from Earth and the Galactic Alliance." The translator at his wrist hummed, converting his words into the light frequencies the Nyxarans understood. Valera's body shimmered in response, patterns flowing from her core outward in what Elian recognized as formal acknowledgement. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped forward, close enough that Elian could feel a gentle warmth emanating from her crystalline body. The delegation behind her pulsed with what seemed like surprise. "You are younger than we expected," came the translated response, her voice in his earpiece sounding like wind through crystal chimes. "Your species sends children to determine its fate?" Elian maintained his composure. "I assure you, Sovereign, I am fully qualified to represent humanity's interests and to understand yours." Valera circled him, her movements fluid like water flowing over stones. "Understanding requires more than words, Ambassador Mercer. It requires resonance." Without warning, she extended her hand toward him, not to shake in human fashion, but palm facing upward, the surface of her skin refracting light in hypnotic patterns. Elian recognized this from his briefing, the greeting of surfaces, a ceremonial exchange usually reserved for Nyxarans of equal status. Commander Reeves stiffened beside him, but Elian knew refusing would end the negotiations before they began. Slowly he raised his palm to mirror hers, hovering just above her crystalline skin. "Not like that," Valera said, and in a swift movement, pressed her palm directly against his. The contact sent a jolt through Elian's body, not painful but intensely intimate. Where their skin met, Valera's crystalline surface softened and light passed between them in pulses that matched his heartbeat. For one disorienting moment he felt as if he could sense her thoughts. Curiosity, caution, and something deeper, more complex. Then she withdrew, her inner light flickering rapidly in patterns too quick for his translator to process. The Nyxaran delegation behind her erupted in similar flickering communications. "You have disrupted the harmony," his translator finally managed, interpreting one of the advisors. "The human's energy is chaotic, uncontrolled." Valera held up a hand, silencing them with a pulse of deep purple light. "Different," she corrected, looking at Elian with those twilight eyes. "Not chaotic, different." She turned, her form catching the light of Nyxara's setting suns. "You will learn our ways, Ambassador Mercer. Beginning tomorrow, you will train in proper resonance. Until then, you are confined to the diplomatic quarters." As the delegation escorted them away, Commander Reeves whispered urgently, "What happened back there? That wasn't in the protocol." Elian watched Valera's retreating form, still feeling the strange connection where their palms had touched. "I think," he said slowly, "she was curious." That night, as he stood at the window of his crystal apartment watching the bioluminescent forests pulse with life, Elian couldn't shake the sensation of Valera's touch, or the feeling that something momentous had begun. Beneath the surface, dawn on Nyxara didn't break so much as it transformed. Elian woke to find his quarters filled with prismatic light, as the crystal walls absorbed and redistributed the first rays of the triple suns. A soft chiming announced his visitor, a slender Nyxaran named Thale, assigned as his cultural guide. "The Sovereign awaits," Thale's translated voice informed him. "You are to begin resonance training." The training chamber was a hexagonal room deep within the palace, its walls embedded with crystals that pulsed gently with their own inner light. Valera stood in its center, her form more subdued than yesterday, the light within her flowing in slow, measured patterns. "Ambassador," she acknowledged him, "to negotiate successfully with my people, you must understand how we communicate." For the next 3 hours, Elian struggled to comprehend the basics of Nyxaran light language. He learned that the speed of pulses indicated urgency, that colors conveyed emotional context, and that touch was reserved for the deepest forms of communication, sharing not just ideas but sensations and memories. "You are trying to translate concepts into your language first," Valera observed after a particularly frustrating exercise. "You must feel the light directly." "That's not how humans work," Elian said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We don't photosynthesize. We don't generate light." Valera tilted her head, studying him. "Yet you radiate energy. I can sense it." She stepped closer, her twilight eyes narrowing. "Something is wrong with your emissions today. They are erratic." Elian tried to step back, but a sudden wave of dizziness made him stumble. He'd been so focused on the training that he'd ignored the headache building behind his eyes, the heaviness in his limbs. The atmospheric composition of Nyxara was similar to Earth's, but subtle differences in radiation and pressure could affect humans after prolonged exposure. "I'm fine," he insisted, even as the room seemed to tilt around him. Valera's inner light shifted to a concerned amber. "You are not. Your species is more fragile than you admit." Before he could protest further, she led him to a curved bench along the wall. "Sit. The first diplomatic meeting is tomorrow. You must be functioning at capacity." To his surprise, she sat beside him, closer than Nyxaran protocol would normally allow. "On Nyxara, when one is unwell, energy transfer can restore balance," she explained, her voice softening in his translator. "I can help if you permit it." The rational part of Elian's mind reminded him of the 17 failed diplomatic missions, of Commander Reeves's warnings, of the strict protocols. But another part, the part still haunted by the connection they'd briefly shared yesterday, made him nod. Valera placed her hands on his temples. This time, he was prepared for the strange sensation of her crystalline skin softening at the point of contact, but not for what followed. A cool wave of relief washed through him as her inner light pulsed in a rhythm that seemed to counterpoint his own body's distress. "Your system relies too heavily on water," she murmured, her fingers tracing light patterns down to his shoulders, "and your muscles store tension differently than ours." Her touch was both clinical and intimate, mapping the unfamiliar territory of his human form, while her light worked to ease his discomfort. Elian found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation, his eyes drifting closed as her hands moved to the base of his neck. "The negotiation points your people have proposed," Valera said suddenly. "They do not address the real crisis on Nyxara." Elian opened his eyes, finding her face closer to his than before. "What do you mean?" Her inner light dimmed slightly. "Our world is dying, Ambassador. Not just changing, dying. The crystal forests no longer regenerate as they once did. Our youngest can barely sustain their light." Her hand stilled on his shoulders. "If we share this truth with your alliance, we fear being seen as desperate, weak." The vulnerability in her admission stunned him. This wasn't diplomatic calculation. This was trust offered without guarantee of reciprocation. "Show me," Elian said softly. Valera's eyes widened, her light pulsing with surprise. "That would require deep resonance. It is not done with outsiders." How can I help your people if I don't understand what they're facing? For a long moment she studied him, her inner light shifting through patterns he couldn't interpret. Then with deliberate slowness she lifted her hands to frame his face. Open your mind to the light, she whispered, as her forehead touched his. The connection that bloomed between them was unlike anything Elian had experienced. Through her light he saw Nixara as she did, the crystal forests once blazing with vibrant color now dimming, the younger generation's light stuttering and weak, the desperate research into alternative energy sources. He felt her fear, her determination, her loneliness at bearing this burden alone. When they finally separated, Elian found himself breathless, as if he'd run miles. Valera's inner light pulsed rapidly, her twilight eyes wide. You saw, she said, sounding astonished. You actually saw? Yes, Elian replied, still processing the intimacy of what they'd shared. And I think I know how we can help each other. As they sat together, planning a new approach to the negotiations, neither mentioned how Valera's hand remained lightly touching his, or how his headache had completely vanished, replaced by a warm, unfamiliar resonance that seemed to echo her presence even when they weren't in contact. Outside the training room, unseen, one of Valera's advisors watched through the crystal wall, his inner light pulsing with alarm and disapproval. Luminous secrets. The diplomatic summit began with an exchange of formal positions that felt hollow to Elian after what he'd experienced with Valera. Representatives from Earth and the Galactic Alliance outlined their proposal: technological exchange, limited human settlement on Nixara's uninhabited continent, shared research initiatives. The Nixaran delegation listened, their inner light steady and revealing nothing of their true reactions. When it was Valera's turn to respond, she rose with fluid grace, her light pulsing in the formal patterns of diplomatic address. But then she did something unprecedented. She shifted to a more intimate frequency, one that Elian recognized from their private session. Honored representatives, her translated voice rang through the chamber. The true crisis facing Nixara is more urgent than previously disclosed. A murmur rippled through both delegations as Valera revealed the extent of her planet's deterioration. Commander Reeves shot Elian a questioning look, clearly wondering how he'd known to prepare alternative proposals that addressed these exact issues. When the session adjourned for deliberation, Reeves cornered him in the crystalline corridor. How did you know about their energy crisis? That wasn't in any briefing. Elian chose his words carefully. The Sovereign shared certain cultural insights during my training. Reeves's eyes narrowed. Cultural insights? Or classified planetary information? Mercer, what exactly is happening between you and the Sovereign? Before he could respond, Thalia approached with urgent pulses of light. Ambassador, the Sovereign requests your presence in the Crystal Garden. Alone. Reeves started to object, but Elian was already following Thalia, relief and anticipation mingling in his chest at the prospect of seeing Valera, away from the formal proceedings. The Crystal Garden was a vast chamber at the heart of the palace, where formations of living crystal grew in spiraling patterns around a central pool of luminescent liquid. Valera stood beside this pool, her back to him, her inner light subdued. You revealed your people's vulnerability, Elian said as he approached. That couldn't have been an easy decision. She turned and he was struck by the intensity in her twilight eyes. After what we shared, continuing the deception seemed dissonant. She gestured to the pool beside her. Do you know what this is? Elian shook his head. Memory crystal in liquid form, our most sacred repository. When Nixarans reach the end of their life cycle, their final resonance is preserved here. Her light pulsed in a pattern he now recognized as deep emotion. I've never shown this place to an outsider. The significance wasn't lost on Elian. Why me? Instead of answering directly, Valera extended her hand toward the pool. Touch it. I want you to see something. Elian hesitated only briefly before kneeling beside the luminescent liquid. As his fingers broke the surface, the sensation was similar to connecting with Valera, a resonance that bypassed his physical senses and spoke directly to his consciousness. Through the liquid crystal, he witnessed the history of Nixara, its golden age when the crystal forests reached toward the stars, the first encounters with other species, the wars that followed, and finally, the slow decline that had brought them to this precipice. When he withdrew his hand, He found Valera kneeling beside him, her face illuminated by the pool's glow. "Now you understand why this alliance matters," she said softly. "Not just for resources or technology, but for survival." "I do," Elian replied, suddenly aware of how close they were. In the liquid light, her crystalline features seemed more expressive, almost human in their vulnerability. Without thinking, he reached out, tracing the contour of her face with his fingertips. Where he touched, her skin responded, softening and emanating a warm, rose-colored light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "This is forbidden," she whispered. But she didn't pull away. Instead, her own hand rose to mirror his gesture, fingers exploring the unfamiliar texture of his human skin. "Why?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Their worlds, their biologies, their duties, everything separated them. "Because I am sovereign," she said, her inner light flickering with conflicted emotions. "Because what I want cannot matter more than what my people need." "And what do you want, Valera?" Instead of answering with words, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his in the Nixaran gesture of deepest trust. The connection that formed between them was immediate and overwhelming. Not just thoughts and memories this time, but emotions, desires, the very essence of their beings reaching across the divide of different worlds. Elian felt himself drawn into her light, surrounded by her presence. His hands found her waist, solid yet yielding, while her fingers tangled in his hair, exploring its unfamiliar texture with wonder. When their lips met, it was a convergence of worlds, the cool crystalline touch of her skin warming where they connected, her inner light flaring bright enough to cast their shadows across the garden. The kiss deepened, transcending the physical, each sensation amplified by their mental connection. They parted breathless, Valera's inner light pulsing in rapid, chaotic patterns that reflected his own racing heart. "This changes everything," she said, her voice barely audible even through the translator. Before Elian could respond, a harsh, discordant pulse of light interrupted them. At the garden's entrance stood Krev, Valera's chief advisor, his crystalline form radiating patterns of shock and rage. "Sovereign," he said, his translated voice cold with fury. "The Council demands your presence immediately. The humans have been accused of espionage and deception." Valera rose swiftly, her diplomatic mask falling back into place, though her inner light still swirled with the echoes of their connection. "What deception?" "They have concealed their true purpose on Nixara," Krev said, his accusatory gaze fixed on Elian. "And you have been compromised by this liaison." As guards appeared at the entrance, Elian realized with growing dread that their private moment had shattered the fragile foundation of trust they'd been building. Whatever happened next would determine not just their personal fate, but the future of both their worlds. Valera's eyes met his, a silent promise passing between them before she turned to follow Krev, her sovereign posture restored but her light still bearing traces of their shared luminescence. Fractured light. The council chamber blazed with hostile light as Elian faced the Nixaran elders. Valera stood on the central dais, her posture rigid, inner light carefully controlled. "The human vessel has been scanning our crystal forests," Krev announced, projecting images of Earth scientific schematics onto the wall. "They seek to replicate our living crystals, not save them," Commander Reeves protested, but her hesitation confirmed Elian's fears. Some faction within the Alliance had continued the research despite his orders to terminate it. "Sovereign Valera," Elian addressed her directly, "I was unaware of these efforts." "They don't represent our official position." "Convenient ignorance," Krev scoffed. "While you distracted our sovereign with forbidden intimacies, your scientists mapped our sacred gardens." Throughout the chamber, Nixaran light patterns shifted to hostility. Valera's inner light flickered momentarily with pain before steadying. "The human delegation will be confined while we investigate," she announced coldly. "All negotiations are suspended." "Sovereign, what we shared," Elian began desperately, "was a mistake," she cut him off. "One I will not repeat." Later in their quarters, Reeves confronted him. "What exactly did she mean by forbidden intimacies, Mercer?" Before Elian could properly explain, a message appeared on the communication crystal. Coordinates, a time, and "Come alone. Trust no one." Hours later, having slipped past his guards through maintenance passages, Elian found Thala waiting in the crystal forest. "The Sovereign cannot be seen with you," Thale explained, "but she sent me to bring you to safety." Krev plans to remove her from power. They traveled deeper into the forest to a clearing with a luminescent pool. Valira waited there, her sovereign regalia replaced by simpler attire. When she saw Elian, her inner light brightened involuntarily. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though relief colored her voice. "Your message suggested otherwise," Elian replied, stepping closer. "I sent no message." Her eyes widened with realization as Thales' light shifted from blue to harsh red. "Forgive me, Sovereign," Thale said as armed guards emerged from the forest. But Krev was right. "This connection is an abomination." Krev stepped into the clearing. "The Council has voted, Valira. You are relieved of your duties. The human will be held for trial." In a blur of motion, Valira's light exploded in a blinding flash. She grabbed Elian's hand and pulled him toward the pool. Pain lanced through his shoulder as a crystal weapon grazed him before they plunged into the luminescent liquid. Elian awoke in a crystal cave cradled in Valira's arms. His wound glowed with an unnatural light as she tended it with liquid crystal. "Where are we?" he gasped. "The heart of the old forest," Valira replied. "Few remember these paths now. You gave up everything, why?" Her inner light pulsed with vulnerability. "Because what I felt with you was real. More real than centuries of isolation on a throne. The resonance between us could save both our worlds." She guided his hand to touch the cave wall. He felt the crystal's pulse, weak, faltering. "The crystals are dying because they've grown too isolated," she explained. "For millennia, they absorbed energy from all life forms that visited Nixara. We retreated, became pure, unchanging. We're starving for new resonance patterns. Your human energy revitalizes our crystals. That's why the gardens brightened where we walked together." "Yes, and why traditionalists fear our connection. It challenges everything about Nixaran purity." As night fell, Valira tended his wound with liquid crystal that sealed the injury. Their isolation and shared danger dissolved the last barriers between them. When Elian drew her into his arms, her crystalline body responded, softening where they connected. Their union sent ripples of light through the cave walls, revitalizing the ancient formations with their shared energy. Afterward, Elian noticed the cave glowing with renewed vitality. New crystal growth had begun along a previously barren wall. "Look," he said, pointing. "It's responding to us, to our combined energy." Valira's eyes widened. This could be the solution. Not just diplomatic agreements, but true symbiosis between our peoples. As dawn approached, they formulated a plan, dangerous and desperate, but with potential to save both Nixara and the Alliance. The night had transformed them, linking their fates as surely as it had linked their hearts. New constellations' dawn broke over Nixara with unusual brilliance, the triple suns casting prismatic light through crystal spires that seemed somehow more vibrant than before. In the central plaza of the capital, Nixarans gathered in concentric circles, their inner light pulsing with anticipation and uncertainty. News of Valira's disappearance had spread, along with rumors of human treachery and council discord. Krev stood upon the ceremonial dais, his light patterns projecting authority as he prepared to address the assembly. "Citizens of Nixara," his amplified voice began, "a grave crisis." He stopped abruptly as a murmur rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned toward the eastern edge of the plaza where two figures emerged from the morning mist. Valira, her crystalline form radiating with unusually bright, complex patterns, and beside her Elian Mercer, his human form subtly altered, faint traces of luminescence visible beneath his skin where his wound had been sealed with crystal. They walked hand in hand, their connected energy creating visible ripples in the air around them. Where they passed, the crystal pavement brightened, responding to their presence with renewed vitality. "Sovereign Valira has been corrupted," Krev declared, his light flashing warning patterns. "Restrain them both." Guards moved forward hesitantly, confused by the unprecedented light patterns emanating from their former leader. Valira raised her free hand and the entire plaza fell silent. "People of Nixara," her voice rang out, needing no amplification as the crystals themselves seemed to carry her words. "For too long we have chosen isolation over connection, purity over growth, tradition over truth." Her inner light pulsed in patterns of absolute sincerity that no Nixaran could misinterpret. "And we are dying because of it." She guided Elian forward, their linked hands raised high. "What you see before you is not corruption but salvation. The human resonance pattern, different from ours but complementary, revitalizes our living crystals. From the human delegation, now emerged from their quarters to witness the commotion, Commander Reeves watched with astonishment. The change in Elian was subtle but undeniable. Something about him had been fundamentally transformed by his time with Valera. "This is blasphemy," Krev protested. "Our ancient laws forbid such mixing of energies." "Our ancient laws were written when Nixara thrived," Valera countered. "When our crystals grew strong from the diverse energies of visitors from many worlds." She turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire gathering. "Look around you. See how the plaza brightens where we walk? This is the symbiosis our ancestors understood before fear closed our world." To demonstrate, she and Elian approached a section of crystal that had grown dull and brittle with age. Together they placed their hands upon its surface. Where they touched, light bloomed outward, the crystal regaining its luster and structural integrity before the astonished eyes of the assembly. "I've analyzed the data from both ships," announced a voice from the human delegation. Dr. Amelia Chen, the expedition's lead scientist, stepped forward with a data tablet. "The Nixaran crystals respond to human bioelectrical fields, absorbing and amplifying our energy without depleting it. It's a perfect symbiotic relationship, one that could revolutionize both our technologies." Murmurs spread through both delegations as the implications became clear. Elian stepped forward, addressing both his people and Valera's with newfound authority. "The unauthorized research project that caused this crisis was misguided," he acknowledged. "We sought to replicate your crystals rather than understand them. But the truth is they cannot be replicated, only collaborated with. They are living entities that require relationship, not exploitation." Valera's inner light brightened with approval as she continued where he left off. "We propose a new kind of alliance. Not merely an exchange of resources, but an exchange of life energy. Human settlements within our crystal forests would revitalize our dying world, while humans would benefit from the enhanced technologies only living crystals can generate." From the crowd, an elder Nixaran counselor stepped forward, her ancient form glittering with accumulated wisdom. "The oldest texts speak of such symbiosis," she said, her translated voice quavering with age. "Before the wars, before our retreat into isolation, the first sovereign called it the mingling of stars." Krev's opposition faltered as more counselors expressed support for investigation of this phenomenon. The evidence before their eyes was undeniable. Everywhere Elian and Valera moved, the crystals responded with renewed vitality. "There will be challenges," Valera acknowledged, addressing both species now. "Cultural adaptations, biological considerations, new protocols to establish. But today we have witnessed the beginning of renewal." As if in response to her words, a subtle change swept through the plaza. Crystal formations that had been dormant for generations began to pulse with faint light, responding to the unique energy signature created by the union of human and Nixaran. The following weeks brought rapid transformation. Under Valera's guidance, a joint scientific commission was established to study and nurture the symbiotic relationship. The human delegation's unauthorized research was formally abandoned in favor of collaborative study. Elian and Valera became the living embodiment of the new alliance, their personal connection deepening as they worked to build bridges between their worlds. The crystal implanted in Elian's wound had spread subtle tendrils through his system, allowing him to perceive Nixaran light patterns without translation, while Valera had developed unprecedented sensitivity to human emotional states and biological rhythms. One evening, as twin moons rose over the revitalized crystal forest, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the city where human construction crews now worked alongside Nixaran architects, creating hybrid structures that could accommodate both species' needs. "The council has voted," Valera said, her inner light pulsing with quiet joy as she turned to face Elian. "They've created a new position, Ambassador of Convergence. They want you to be the first." Elian smiled, tracing the luminescent patterns that now occasionally appeared on his own skin when emotions ran high. "And what does the sovereign want?" Valera's light shifted to the intimate patterns he'd come to cherish, patterns meant only for him. "The sovereign wants what she has always wanted since a certain human diplomat first disrupted her carefully ordered existence." Her crystalline fingers interlaced with his. Partnership, connection, a shared path forward. As their lips met, the crystal railing beneath their hands blossomed with new growth, spiraling patterns that merged and transformed, neither fully human nor fully Nixaran, but something new and vibrant with possibility. In the gardens below, the first human Nixaran children played. Human children whose exposure to the crystal environment had begun to manifest in subtle luminescence. Nixaran younglings whose light pulsed stronger in the presence of their human friends. Their laughter rose into the night air, a harmony of worlds that had once seemed impossibly distant, now growing together toward a shared horizon. New constellations, Elian murmured against Valera's temple, using the Nixaran phrase that had come to symbolize their union. New constellations, she agreed, her light merging with his as they stood witness to the future they had created, not through diplomatic protocols or technological exchange, but through the simple revolutionary power of connection across the stars.